Welcome to the 2 to 20 podcast, the podcast that empowers women how to build, fund, and scale their businesses. I'm Katie Vander.
And I'm Julia Bell, and today we have a very special guest, Scout Brisson.
Yes.
So excited to be here.
So Scout, you're the CEO of DeSois, and I really appreciate you joining us. We met a few months ago through a few other female founders. I can't actually even remember.
It was Kara.
Kara, yes. Okay. And we previously spoke. I loved your story. And so I'm excited to kind of dig into your background. Maybe you could give us a brief intro into kind of who you are, and then we'll kind of get into more of the story behind you.
Yeah, for sure. So as you said, I'm the CEO at DeSois, a non-alcoholic sparkling aperitif company. So if you don't know what aperitif is, it's basically a fancy cocktail. But I joined the brand before we launched. So I came on board in October of 2021. We launched in January of 2022. We have two powerhouse co-founders as well, Morgan McLaughlin, who's a master distiller, which basically means she concocts and formulates alcoholic beverages for a living, and Katie Perry, whose name speaks for itself. Prior to DeSois, I started my own company in the better for you snacking space. So I'm really passionate about all things that I would eat and drink, and don't make me feel like I'm missing out on the moment, whatever that moment is. But I grew up on the East Coast. I went to MIT for my undergrad before going into the world of management consulting at McKinsey. I think people sometimes look at me and they're like, Scout, how did you go from MIT to Beverage, which is notoriously difficult as a category? And I always say, like, I really, as a oldest daughter, type A perfectionist, I decided after I graduated from college and didn't go to med school, like the path I had charted out for myself, is like, I want to be more of a blank slate and like really figure out what I'm excited about. When I left McKinsey, it was really with this thesis for myself of being part of earlier stage businesses and really being able to like maybe launch my own company one day. So in that in-between step of McKinsey and then starting my own company, I was at a venture fund in LA, M13, who has an in-house studio, and I was a part of incubating new brands there. So I've touched a little bit of a lot, I would say, prior to DeSois. And I know we'll talk about how it all comes into play. But yes, that's the journey to where we are now.
It sounds like the common thread was difficulty. Let me pick the hardest school and then we pick the hardest category.
Well, and if it tells you anything about me too, I was a rower, which I feel like is notoriously like masochistic mindset about everything.
Okay, so if you need something difficult done, go to Scout.
Yes.
She can tackle it.
I was going to say, I wonder what lessons from corporate world VC prepared you to be a founder, because I would assume there's like sort of like being in a consultant is sort of like boot camp for the management world. And then like VC is like, how are we, like, especially in the studio model, like what exactly are we doing to like go from 0 to 100 very quickly? I wonder what some of like the top lessons that you learned from both maybe your corporate world and then kind of the VC studio model.
Yeah, I'll start with McKinsey because I've gotten this question more and more recently. Like I've done some really fun virtual panel opportunities in LA with UCLA, and students will ask me, hey, I'm thinking about joining a startup or I'm thinking about going down the consulting route. And I'm always torn because I feel like when I was at McKinsey, I was 21 years old. They were putting me in rooms, expecting me to have a voice, have an opinion. I was learning whether it was deck building and like, it sounds so cheesy, but like the storytelling that goes into deck building, which I think is being in the startup world, you're pitching all the time, it feels like. So you really have to think about what that narrative is. The analytics side of like building a model and how do you like get to a decision that's 80% grounded in analysis and 20% grounded in the bigger picture. And so a lot of the McKinsey-esque toolkit was about problem solving, and whether that was being really analytical in your problem solving or being more conceptual in your problem solving, it shows up for me time and time and time again at a startup where you are literally solving problems for a living. And I think that is something I see where like, being a manager prior to DeSois was not a big part of my journey. Like maybe at most I managed one person, but we're a small team, but a team of 10. And I feel like the biggest thing I have to offer the people that work for me in the form of mentorship is how do we approach the problems, and how do you, as the owner of a function or the owner of this problem you're trying to solve, actually like bring that information upwards and bring it to your boss or me to make a fast decision and like show and demonstrate ownership in that. So that's the McKinsey side of it. Now, on the totally opposite side, which I feel like was being in the VC world, was getting really, really scrappy and in a limited resource environment. Again, taking like the same type of problem that you might get a McKinsey at a much later stage company, but say, how am I going to figure this out? And saying, okay, I've got like, let me phone a friend. Like, I think like phoning a friend is like the most underrated tool in your toolkit of like, I'm not the first person to run into what like subscription app should I use to set up my business on Shopify, or I have a co-manufacturer who's like not giving me the product, the amount of product, and the scrap rate is way too high. How do I handle that? And talking to other operators who have been through that before, or investors who have seen other operators go through it. And so I feel like just learning how to both like build that network and then leverage that network to help you get the introductions or get the tools or make the decisions that you're trying to make.
I love that.
We used to phone a friend all the time with each other.
I was just going to say, I just posted about this this morning, about me calling Julia on Friday and needing something, and she made like multiple intros for me immediately. So like there's sort of this, I know I have my own resources, experiences, and background education to prepare me for things, but honestly, like shortcuts from calling or phoning a friend is oftentimes like the true answer for solving a lot of things in business.
Well, and you have to put, I think that's the thing people don't always think about either. It's like, you've got to put those deposits in, right? It's like you two obviously have an amazing relationship, but you think about somebody who you're 1 degree from, and it's like, I will a lot of the times be on phone calls with other founders, other operators who were like, hey, I just want to pick your brain about X, Y, or Z. And it's like, I'm happy to give that, because people give that back to you in spades too. And so you have to look at it as an investment, because the return is not going to be instantaneous to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I love when anytime I go to events and they say, what do you need and what can you provide? Or I forget, there's like a more eloquent way that they say it, but it's like, what skills do you have or what knowledge do you have that you could potentially share and help out with? And then what is something you're looking for? So absolutely, I love that. Yes. How big is the team now? You mentioned management. How big is the team now on DeSois?
We're 10 people.
Okay. Yeah. So from 1 to 10.
I know.
But still, 1 to 10, it's a jump.
Yeah. And it's like, I think probably the hardest part of the job is the people management, and it starts at hiring, right? And I've done a really great job there, kind of accidentally, and I've done a not so great job there. And I feel like the biggest thing I've learned has been, it's going to sound maybe obvious, but it's like, you have to figure out what kind of people you want to work with and you work well with. And I'm sure that looks different for every person, but I'm like, for me, it's just been figuring out like, what is the archetype of who I want to hire? And spoiler, but like, they look a lot like me. They're people who like don't necessarily have the reps or experience, but like have a lot of drive and ambition and curiosity and just like capacity to grow. And then it becomes really rewarding to manage those types of people, because they're like, I want this really badly, not just for DeSois, but for myself, right? And what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think like the values of a person is almost equally as important as like the hard skills. I mean, you need the hard skills, but if someone's willing to put in the work to figure it out, or to ask a lot of questions, or put in the work to learn, that's almost just as important as, I've done this already and I know what to do, kind of thing, but I have an ego about it or whatever, you know?
I would probably argue more important too, just in what I've seen. Yeah. And you have to know your own blind spots, because I do think, okay, like I sit over our marketing function. I'm definitely like not a marketer at my core. And so I also have to know my own blind spots and it's harder for me to hire marketing talent because of that blind spot. And so I don't know, it might be like getting an investor involved in that hiring process who I think has that strength, and just making sure that you check yourself too, so that you get the right person who has the intuition, the hard skill set, but then also has all those values that you're solving for as a leader.
Yeah, the phone a friend thing applies to interviews too,
Yes.
because I've brought advisors into interviews before too, and it's so helpful, especially
Completely.
technical ones for me personally. But
right, yeah, like you know what your blind spot is.
Yeah. I was going to ask, kind of related to that, like, what do you think one of the most surprising things has been for you as a founder? Like, has anything kind of shocked you, either about like yourself or just the experience in general that maybe you didn't expect kind of over the last couple of years?
I'd say I think this is like, people talk about the loneliness a lot. I think the surprising part is how not lonely it can be when you have the right people around you. And this, I mean, we're going to continue on this like phone a friend thread, but I've had great thought partners in business, and thought partners who made my mental health worse, right? And like who made that experience a lot worse. And I've had really amazing investors and mentors, and ones who are less amazing. And I think that you can feel like, I mean, I'll give you an example, but like I had a couple weekends ago, it was like I just had like a series of emails that I'm sure you guys have both felt this, where you're like, crap, like I got like rejected and then kicked when I was down. And now I have the Sunday scaries because I just like kind of feel like crap because of what happened over the weekend. And Monday morning, like my first call of the day after feeling this way was with our COO, John, who's my thought partner in the business. And I just said to him, I was like, I think there's so much power in voicing that. And so I was like, honestly, I'm feeling like a little defeated because of these things that happened over the weekend. And he's like, I totally get that. And then like later that day, you have like a little win and it turns your whole week around. But I feel like being able to like voice that to people makes it feel a lot less powerful, and how it can negatively impact your mood. And just knowing, which is like, this is, everybody knows, but like being a founder is just like ups and downs and ups and downs and ups and downs, and just figuring out like, how do I ride those waves a little bit more gracefully?
yeah, absolutely. It's nice that you have someone internally too that you can share things that are maybe a little bit more confidential, but not going to freak out if it's bad news about the company.
Right.
But it's still like, understands that these things happen. You're going to get a win and a loss all in the same day, and they could equal each other out. But that's great that you have that.
Yeah. Or maybe you get like 5 losses in a row, right?
Yeah, that happens too all the time.
Yeah,
I had one
I'm
of
like,
those weeks recently.
right. Or I'm like, yeah, the retailer passes on us, doesn't give us any feedback, an investor passes, and somebody on the team wants a raise that you can't give that. Like, it's just like, you get like that stuff. Sometimes when it rains, it pours. And I think my other piece that has surprised me is that I work a lot, don't get me wrong, but the more dissociated I am emotionally from the things that come up, actually, the better I am at my job. And so I'm like, having boundaries can actually it reduces my burnout. It makes me more effective. It makes me, I'm sure, a better people leader, because I'm not like coming in mopey to every call and like taking it out on everyone else. And so I do think there's like a little bit something counterintuitive, where I'm like, the more I've dissociated my identity, and this has been, I found easier as a CEO than as a founder, but like dissociating my identity from the brand, then in turn, I think I just like show up as a better person for everyone else.
Absolutely. I work in mental health, so I'm like cheering you on as you're saying all of this, and couldn't agree more. And it's hard to not get wrapped up in it, but you are really your company's greatest asset. And when you are well and in a good headspace and are taking care of yourself, your business is so much better. So I could not agree more on all those fronts.
Yeah. What are you doing in the background to be building yourself up outside of work? Because I know I've been very lost in the work, the building, working on weekends.
Mm-hmm.
It's like if the company does well, I feel well. If it does bad, I feel bad. So what are you doing in the background to make sure that there's like identity building happening outside of you as CEO?
I mean, it has to be very intentional, and I totally agree with that. I mean, I had, for instance, it was kind of a long time ago, but 2.5 years ago, and I'm not a big New Year's resolution person, so I don't know what came over me that year, but I felt like I was spending so much time in just all of my learning and growth was like work related, and I was like, I need hobbies. So I started taking tennis lessons with my partner, and I got really into, this is random because I'm like not good at gardening, but I like have this really nice patio in LA. So I like got into my plants on the patio and just started growing more things. Like it gave me such a sense of, or even recently I had a friend who was like, I make sourdough bread, and she gave me some starter. And I'm like, great, I'm going to learn how to make sourdough bread 5 years late on the trend. But, like all of those things that I just named, like gave me such a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment that was much more significant than I expected it to be. And so I realized from that I'm like, okay, investing, not just spend time with friends or get time to myself, but like actually investing in something where I can see myself getting better or like achieving something, even if it's really small, feeds into that sense of self in a way that, like Katie, when you're describing like just feeling so tied to the outcomes at work, I'm like, well, the retailer said no, but like at least I can make sourdough bread.
I know. I lost all of my hobbies. During COVID, I went crazy and I was living back in Washington and I was making tables. I became a woodworker.
Cool.
What? This is amazing news.
Did you have a TikTok account? I feel like I'm on that.
No,
side of
but I
TikTok.
should have. But it was hilarious. And it was also such a cute bonding activity between my dad and I, because we would just go out to the garage and he'd help me and he'd also take the truck and we'd go buy wood together. We were like going to all these like places and like
It's so cute.
it was so cute.
Wait,
So I don't know.
also,
I do.
yeah, Katie, I think that we need to do like a founder instead of like a dinner or like an event. We need to do like a founder slash CEO, female business people
Yes.
event and instead of doing like a wine and paint night, we could do like a DeSois and something night. Like, I don't
Pottery?
know. Yeah.
Well,
pottery would be hard because
we just did a DeSois paint. We did like painted these plates and did like a painting and sip,
like a color me mine type of thing.
Yeah,
like,
and it
my
was
gosh,
so therapeutic.
Let's do this.
Okay, we need to do this. We're planning
We
it.
need to be making more things.
Yeah, we need hobbies. Literally, my husband last year was like, you have no hobbies. And my husband is like, hobby guy. Like, he has all the hobbies. So I was like, well, you have enough for both of us as a joke. And he was like, no. Like, we need to figure something out. So I did take a pottery class and I loved it. But pottery is such a commitment. But it was a lesson in like patience and because I was like I was frustrated. Like it's kind of hard. But anyway, I also have a small herb garden and I tend to that in the mornings.
Well, actually, herbs are like, that's a great, if you like cooking, herbs are such a, I don't say easy because I do kill a lot of herbs, but then I just buy new ones and I'm like, it's satisfying because you can like pull it into your cooking right away.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Bringing that up, maybe we could talk about kind of the background of it being a non-alcoholic brand, and then maybe just your thoughts, sentiments on like the non-alcoholic low ABV market in general. Especially in Los Angeles, this is obviously there's like bars popping up that are non-alcoholic and a lot of that tech activities are now non-alcoholic. So I feel like it's a great market here in LA, but maybe just what are your thoughts on having a brand that is non-alcoholic and how you've been thinking about that too?
Yeah, I was visiting my parents right now, and my mom actually works for a wine importer distributor. So we have a lot of really interesting conversations about people drinking less and the evolution of the alcohol industry and the growth of DeSois and, our industry. And I think what's really interesting is looking at just like the consumption patterns. We talked about COVID because of hobbies, and during COVID, all of these wine and spirits companies, distributors, that whole ecosystem benefited tremendously. And then we all came out on the other side of it. And we were socially deprived, we were travel deprived, we were way in and over our heads when it came to consumption. And I think people really wanted to be healthier, and being healthier meant something a lot more than just like go back to workout classes, right? It was like really about this like whole wellness wheel. And so you started to see, I think, a more intense rise of the non-alcoholic alternatives. As the way I always describe it and kind of like pitch what we offer is, nobody likes being on a diet. Like, you don't want to feel like you're missing out on something. And so if you say, oh, I know I should be drinking less and I want to cut back on whatever, my glass of wine during the week, like putting something else in its place that satisfies, but then doesn't have those effects, is where DeSois and any other alternatives really come in. And I've seen such a shift over the last, almost 4 years of being involved with the brand, where when I started it, I'd say, oh, I run a non-alcoholic beverage company. And people are like, what, like soda? Like, what do you mean? And now they say, which one? And I think that that's the evolution I get the most excited about, because you talked about being an entrepreneur, and like you get a lot of no's, you get a lot of rejection when you're building a new category. There's a lot of people who don't understand it. There's still a lot of people who don't understand it. But I feel like the next, 1, 2, 3 years, what they hold is a continued growth of the presence of options. And I think options, even what you were describing at networking events, at restaurants, at the grocery store, just means people are going to keep discovering new rituals and new habits that just make them feel better, frankly. And I'm like, that's what I'm a believer in, is I'm like, sometimes I want the real spicy margarita. Sometimes I want the DeSois non-alcoholic spicy margarita, but I just want the choice.
Yeah. What markets are doing well outside of LA? Who else is buying into this outside of us?
Okay, so funny story. This was now a couple years ago, but I was at one of our manufacturers in South Dakota, and at the time, we were developing our non-alcoholic Aperol spritz, and they were all non-alcoholic beer drinkers, which has been a huge, just like paver of the way trailblazer. I'm like, not paver of the way, but both trailblazer for all these other subcategories. And so everybody at this facility, they were drinking non-alc beer and their barbecues on the weekend, but none of them knew what an Aperol spritz was. And it was really interesting for me just thinking about our target customer, I think, is truly across the country. And whether it's our rosé that they're drinking, or now our margarita, or they've discovered Aperol spritzes and they love Spritz Italiano, like, it is really not a coastal brand. So like some big markets for us, I'd say like the Midwest, we have a lot of really great accounts there. Chicagoland more broadly. We definitely see some like hot spots in Texas and around Atlanta, in the Southeast. So I really feel like while health and wellness focused markets have led the way, you're getting a lot of these like more suburban pockets that young parents especially are like, oh, I'm just like, again, not so sure I need to be consuming at the rate or volume that I was once consuming.
And like you said, to kind of bring it back to choice, it's nice to have a choice instead of like, oh, I want something that is going to like take the edge off, feel ritualistic. Like when you're making a cocktail, feels like a little bit of like a ritual, right? And then you put it in a fancy glass or whatever, and it feels nice to have something as an alternative that still feels fancy, I think is great.
Well, and I remember one of my early conversations was with somebody in the industry, and I forget, he had worked at, I think it was Diageo, when they were trying to get people to pour their Kettle One RTDs. And like, they really wanted people drinking out of a glass was the ritual they were trying to encourage. And they just couldn't get people to not drinking out of a can. Whereas with DeSois, it's like 80% plus of our customers are pouring it out of the can into a glass and adding a garnish like you're describing. And I think it's because of that ritual, like still having that feeling of satisfaction is about more than just the liquids itself.
Sorry if this is naive, but how do you get that information? Like, how do you know that 80% are pouring it into a glass?
We survey our online customers all the time. So we just send like a post-purchase survey out and try to learn as much about them as we can.
That makes sense.
What's the breakdown between And again, I'm also naive to this industry. So, but what's the breakdown between direct to consumer or like restaurants versus maybe retail? Do you have
Yeah, I mean,
those three channels,
most
I
of our
assume?
business is retail. Our restaurant business is pretty small. I'd say the role that it will play for us over time is less about driving revenue and volume and more about awareness and marketing, because you'll see it on a menu somewhere and then try it and say, oh, like now I'm going to see it at, if you shop at Erewhon or I don't know, Target or something like that, and then you run into it. But most of our business is really grocery and retail.
Great.
Yeah.
So the CPG category, it's so brutal. Like you were talking about originally, like trying to figure out the right packaging, distributors, figuring all that out. Has that changed drastically over the last couple of years? And like, what are your thoughts on like the future of like the CPG space? Any lessons learned? Because I know that that's getting over those initial hurdles in year 1 and 2 of starting a CPG brand is the hardest.
Yeah, I think the macro shifts have been quite substantial and I'm sure affected a lot of industries beyond CPG. But first, starting with just the availability of capital that we saw during COVID looks really different. And therefore, the expectations of investors looks really different. So you had a dry spell where there wasn't a lot of M&A activity. We've now seen some like big beverage exits, some big snack brand exits that is returning capital to the markets and getting investors feeling bullish again. But still, they want to see, instead of growth at all costs, it's all about path to profitability and unit economics, which I think is ultimately a healthier mindset in place to start from. But I'm sure there are businesses who started building one way and then the goalpost just moved. So that's been one big one. I feel like recently the impact of tariffs has been really difficult to even understand and navigate. Generally speaking, food and beverage is a lot more insulated than other categories are in consumer goods, because I would say just like our supply chains. I mean, if you look at like beauty and skincare, so much of that's overseas or apparel. But like it'll be, oh, okay, we have 20% tariff on aluminum, and then that's 50% effective at midnight, right? Like that news came out recently. So I feel like all you can do as an operator in this space is, as much as possible, try to find opportunities to expand your margin, because at the end of the day, like there's just not that much aluminum that's available domestically, or we can't source yuzu from the United States. So it's like, how do you make sure that you're finding growth so that you can absorb any of those impacts? But it's a challenging time to be, I think, operating a business in this market in general. And certainly you're seeing it on the consumer end, right? Like Target's one of our biggest accounts, and there's a lot of data that just shows like purchasing behavior is really down in their stores. And so I think just like following what is the overall consumer feeling in the US right now when it comes to discretionary spending and uncertainty, and then how am I as a business going to be impacted by policy changes that are really changing overnight.
Yeah. Wow.
It's tough to
You
navigate.
did a great synopsis there.
Yeah, that was amazing. As a CEO, I'm curious how you split your time, because you said you oversee like the marketing function, but obviously like supply chain, current events, like all these things, financials, it all ultimately rests on your shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
Does every week look a little bit different in terms of what you're doing, especially being, early in the company stage and having a small team? Or if you had to put things into buckets, like how would you say that your time is split?
Yeah. I mean, it obviously fluctuates a ton. And like last week, I was in New York City for work for BevNet Live, had a beverage conference, and I was on a panel there. So because I was in New York, I was really prioritizing more of the external facing aspects of my job, which we put this paint and sip night on. And I invited a bunch of, other operators and founders to come together. I was doing a lot of running around New York City in the 90-degree weather and having meetings with potential investors, with other operators, which again, like no direct, oh, I want to have an outcome come out of this, but like building those relationships. This week, because I was so out of pocket last week, I'm really a lot more internal focused. So today mean, I was actually from like 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. today. I'm in back-to-back meetings. And it's like, okay, catching up with my head of marketing, catching up on our demand planning and forecasting for the rest of the back half of this year as we come up to the end of June. Thinking about, we had our wholesale weekly team meeting because they were at a trade show last week. So we were getting all caught up again. So I'd say I sit over, marketing, finance, and product, and I end up spending a lot of my time really on like the marketing and product side alongside, other teammates. But I'm definitely like letting kind of the ebbs and flows of the business pull me into different directions. And so sometimes it's like, okay, I really need to be focused on, if I'm in fundraising mode, I really have to be focused on that is my full-time job. Nobody else at the company can do that. So clear my calendar of anything that's not mission critical. If I'm not fundraising, I think there's a little bit more elasticity to say, okay, I'm going to invest my time in things that, like, maybe 1 month I'm not as deep on our Amazon metrics. So let me get deeper on Amazon and see how I can provide value to the team. Or I've not been spending as much time thinking about distribution expansion. So let me reach out to some people in my network where we're looking for new distributors. So I try to be pretty intentional on the calendar, because days like today, you're like, oh my God, I'm an extrovert, but not by the end of the day.
Yeah, tonight you need to lean into some of those hobbies or downtime after you get off your last meeting.
Maybe just like a black box.
Yeah, those back-to-backs are rough.
Yeah, isolation chamber.
We get that. Kind of one of my last questions was just around what it's like building a brand or a company with other well-known founders. So you have two people that are associated with your company that are both pretty well-known for their industry.
Yeah.
And how you tap into that, and what parts of, maybe whether it's the marketing or it's the go-to-market or it's the fundraising. I'm just curious how you utilize having them involved with your company.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually one part is I'm kind of laughing because I'm thinking about how I was talking about hiring people like me. And I'm like, that's not really, if I think about like Katie's brain and Morgan's brain, I'm like, I'm in such awe of these two women because they think so differently than I do. And it's really complementary to, I'm like, okay, I get to be the like ex McKinsey boring business person. They're like the incredible creatives. And like, Morgan, usually when I always would think of formulation, I would think of science and R&D. And obviously like she has that aspect, but a lot of it is like truly a creative function and thinking about how do you layer flavor profiles to get that nose, mid-palate finish experience on a new product that we're developing. But I think it's really about like, where does everybody in like this symphony of building DeSois, like where does everybody get to flex into their strengths? So like for me, my palette is not a strength. Morgan's palette is a strength. So obviously like she leans in really heavily there. For Katie, I mean, she's got this like incredible knack when it comes to marketing and creative. And so I love to tell this story of one of our most popular flavors, Spritz Italiano. For the longest time, we were naming it Spritz Italian, and like with an EN, because that was the French way of spelling it. And she's like, Scout, that just doesn't roll off the tongue. And she's like, it has to be Italiano. And you're like, oh, duh. Right. But like, that's something that like, I mean, Katie obviously has a knack for. But tactically, it's like Katie, the charisma, the star power, the way she can like fire up our distributors or get a retail buyer excited about DeSois is unlike anything I've ever seen. Or, she's got this incredible platform and really engaged audience on Instagram. And so like, how does she get to speak to the audience to talk about a new product that we're launching or a new retailer that we're launching in? And then that keeps the flywheel moving on everything else that our team is doing to be able to build the brand. So I think like there's a lot of brands that have talent behind them, and it's a big responsibility to make sure that you're, with integrity, like both how Katie thinks about it and how, us as operators think about it, of like build the brand and, how does the platform come into that and like create something that can be really big and really meaningful and a household name. Because at the end of the day, that's that's the shared goal.
I love that your skills are complementary. And also, I'm just thinking about how fun it must be to like taste test all of these amazing drinks and come up with these fun marketing campaigns. Like, I'm not, like, I don't consider myself to be like super creative, although I'm trying to lean into more of that side of myself. But yeah, like the Italiano thing, it's just like, it makes total sense.
Right. Like, it's so obvious in retrospect.
Yeah.
And it's even things too, like now that I've like gone through a couple flavor iterations with Katie, I'm like, I can put myself into her shoes and think, okay, how is Katie going to react to? So like when Imruta, who leads marketing at DeSois, like brings me a name, like that doesn't roll off the tongue. Like it doesn't roll off the tongue. So it's like, I get to learn too from some of those experiences, which it's just like, yeah, to your point, like what a gift that is.
Absolutely.
That's great. Well, it sounds like we maybe should plan an event when you're back in LA sometime, and we can make sure to dig into having some more hobbies.
Yeah, those are our takeaways. I love it. Phone a friend, have more hobbies, host more activity events.
Okay, great. Well, I'm excited. Well, I super appreciate you joining us today and excited to keep watching you and the company grow. So
wait, I have to ask one last question. What is your favorite DeSois product? Like, what's the number one drink that you go to?
Spritz Italiano is my favorite. Okay. Yeah. I will say a really, really close second is, and this is not the time of year, but we have a seasonal flavor, St. Moritz Mule, which is like a pomegranate Moscow Mule, and it is excellent. I have been hoarding my cans until we relaunch it. Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna go and order some. Well, when that's available, but in the meantime, I'll order.
We might have like a little Christmas in July moment coming up, so keep your eye
out.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I love it. Well, thank you so much both for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Hey.